So I want to do a quick video here on uh, unit conversions. How do we convert from one type of unit to another? So maybe you want to know how many feet there are in 6.3 miles or anything like that. Just something along that ways. The basic trick here, or it's not really a trick, really the only method you can do is to multiply by the number 1. So we're going to just multiply by 1. And multiplying by 1 is just one of the most useful things you can do in all of math. And I know you're probably thinking, well, wait, when you multiply by 1, you just get back what you already had, like 7 times 1 is just 7, or 186 times 1 is just 186. And yeah, that's the point here. Unit conversion is about converting units, not actually changing the number. And so the only thing we can really multiply by without changing the number is the number 1. So best way to kind of go about this is just to show you through an example. And something pretty easy we'll start with. So let's say I wanted to convert 7 kilometers, and we want to convert that over into just regular old meters. Well, the way I would go about doing this is, like I said, just multiplying by the number 1. So I want to put 7 kilometers down, and then I want to make some sort of fraction here where I'm going to cancel out kilometers and end up with meters. So in order to cancel out kilometers, which is in the numerator of our 7 kilometers number, I need to have kilometers in the denominator of my fraction, and I want to end up with meters in the numerator, so I need to put meters in the numerator here. So if I look at this right now, kilometers will cancel with kilometers, and I would have just a meter left. Unfortunately, this doesn't make much sense because I have no values out here. So the next thing I need to do, and really the biggest trick part here, is I need to pick some numbers to go right here. And I have to pick them in such a way that this fraction here, this, has a value of 1. Because like I said, I don't want to actually change the value of my number. I just want to change how it looks. I want to convert how it looks, but still keep it the same value. I want it to still have this length of 7 kilometers. So if I'm going to multiply by something, it has to be by the number 1. And the simple way to do that is to say, well, there are 1,000 meters, which is 10 to the third, in 1 kilometer. And if I do that, then this fraction here is the number 1. Because what do you get when you divide something by itself? If you divide 8 by 8, you get 1. If you divide 16 by 16, you get 1. If you divide 942 by 942, you get 1. And when I look here, I have 10 to the third meters in the numerator, and I have 1 kilometer in the denominator, and I know that 10 to the third meters is equal to 1 kilometer. There are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. So it's the same thing. This 1,000 meters is the same thing as this 1 kilometer, and when I divide something by itself, it's the number 1. And so if I then do this math here, if I multiply these together, what I'll get is kilometers canceling with kilometers, the whole thing, the K and the M, and I'll be left with 7 times 10 to the third meters. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a second, this would have been a lot easier if I had just paid attention to the prefixes, and I knew that kilometer, this K, stands for times 10 to the third, and I could have just replaced it and done that. And yes, that's true. For this problem, that would have been a much easier thing, but not always. So say, for example, I had 3.2 miles, and I want to convert that over to feet. All right, what do I do? Well, again, I'm going to multiply by 1. Right? That's our big goal here. Multiply by 1. So I'm going to take 3.2, right, miles, and then I need to make my fraction. That's the number 1. I need to cancel out miles. It's in the numerator, so I need to put it in the denominator. And I need to end up with feet. So right there, that's done. And then I need to just make this the number 1. And I need to know that essentially my big trick to this is that I know that in 1 mile is equal to 5,280 feet. So 1 mile is the same thing as 5,280 feet. And if I then cancel out my units, my miles will cancel. This is the number 1 because 5,280 feet is the same thing as 1 mile. So this is the number 1. So I multiply them together and I end up with 3.2 times 5,280 gives you 116,896, and then the only unit I've left over is feet. And that's how many feet there are in 3.2 miles. Now, don't start to think that you always put what you're trying to cancel out in the denominator, because sometimes you might be trying to cancel out something that is in the numerator. Move this down a little bit. In which case you have to then put what you're trying to get rid of in the, what you're trying to cancel out is in the denominator, and you have to put it in the numerator. So let's say I had something that was something like 11.2 kilometers per second, which I think is about the escape velocity for Earth. And let's say I wanted to change that to kilometers per minute. And so, or let's do kilometers per hour, so we can see what happens not only when we have something we're trying to change in the denominator, but when we need to make 2 steps with it. And making 2 steps with it is pretty simple. You multiply by 1 twice. You do it in 2 steps. So first step is to change seconds into minutes. I want to ultimately get this to be an hour. That's my goal. But I don't know how many seconds there are in an hour. We'll pretend we don't know. That one's really not that hard, but let's pretend we don't know how many seconds there are in an hour, and we're going to go ahead and just convert seconds into minutes. That one's not hard. We should all pretty much know that. Now, seconds is in the denominator here, which means over here I need to put it in the numerator. That way it'll cancel out. It's in the denominator, it goes in the numerator. Up here, it's in the numerator, it has to go in the denominator. What we're trying to cancel out, you got to do the opposite and get it to cancel out. You got to do the inverse. And over here we want minutes. And then we need to make this the number 1, and I know that in 1 minute, there are 60 seconds. Now this fraction is the number 1. 60 seconds, same thing as a minute. You're dividing something by itself. That gets rid of the seconds and leaves us with a kilometer per minute. If we just multiplied that now, we'd have kilometers per minute. But we want kilometers per hour, so we need to multiply by 1 again. Now I have minutes in the denominator, which means I need to put minutes in the numerator to cancel it out. And then I also know how many minutes there are in an hour. I know how they are equivalent. I know that in 1 hour is the same thing as 60 minutes. And now my minutes will cancel with my minutes. This is still the number 1, and I'll end up with just an hour in the denominator. So I've essentially multiplied by the number 1 and then by the number 1 again. And this will give me, let me type this one in, it's 11.2 times 60, and then times 60 again, and that gives us 40,320 kilometers per hour. And that would then be the speed of it in kilometers per hour. And if we even wanted to change it to meters per hour, we would just have to, again, multiply by 1 out here. We'd have to find a fraction that canceled out kilometers, gave us meters, and told us the same number of kilometers there were in meters. So it'd be 1,000 meters over 1 kilometer, and they'd cancel out basically just what we did up here. I believe when I converted kilometers into meters, you would just, if you just took this here, it's the number 1, it converts meters to kilometers and does that. You could put that right here on the end and multiply that in, or even before we multiplied this out, you could have put it right here. And really, there's no end to how much of these you can string out, as long as you're making this the number 1, and you're making sure this is the number 1 in such a way that it cancels out the units you're trying to get rid of and leaves you ultimately with what you want in the right place. You don't want to end up with kilometers on the top or anything like that. So, if I had tried to do this one and I had if I had a kilometer per second, the same one again, we'll do 11.2. Let me move this down a little bit. And I tried to do this, but I mixed it up. I put 1 minute over 60 seconds here, right? Well, if I tried to do that, look, seconds and seconds are both in the denominator. That would give me a seconds squared in the denominator, and then in the top I'd have a kilometer times a minute. So I'd have a kilometer minute per second squared. Nothing's canceling out. That's not working. So if you have that happen where nothing's canceling out, it's not doing what you want, you may want to check and see if did you accidentally flip this the wrong way, which means you need to take the reciprocal of it and do like what we did here, where it was 60 seconds over 1 minute. Okay, so this works with converting prefixes. It works with converting all kinds of things. Pounds to newtons and all kinds of things will do. And I highly recommend you get this down, and it takes some practice, but ultimately it should pay